Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Everyday Faith, day 13. And we are continuing our journey through this month's theme of suffering. My name is Rachel Janice, and today we're going to be looking at a quote from St. Augustine. It says, "God had one son on earth without sin, but never one without suffering." And I just love that. I love it for many reasons, but I love how it piggybacks off of what we discussed yesterday. As far as, us suffering like Jesus suffered, and how it led ultimately to his death, but it didn't end at the death. Because of the suffering and because of the death, it turned into this powerful resurrection. And all the power behind the resurrection wouldn't have been, it's not as goosebumpy if it wouldn't have been the suffering and the death. So I love how this quote just reminds us that even Jesus was on this earth without sin, but he suffered. We've all suffered. We're all going to suffer. And a couple things come to my mind when I talk about that, when I say that. The first one is, I think a lot of times we are quick to think and say, I've had this said to me, and I've said this to people, so it's kind of both ways. Why do bad things happen to good people? Because of Jesus. Because we are called to suffer like Jesus. Because we're called to suffer just like Jesus. And then they'll say, well, Rachel, why does a loving, good God call us to suffer? And then you're like, oh, that's a great question. And so it made me think about that, why? I had to take notes because I was full of good stuff this morning. It's how come a loving God calls all of his children, even the one without sin, to suffer? And so I was thinking about that, and like I said, kind of piggybacking off of yesterday's, I think he calls us into a life of suffering for, I'm trying to think of a good word. I didn't put the good words on my notes. Maybe it's called for a life of fulfillment. Fulfillment's a good word. So we're called into this life of suffering because ultimately the suffering is going to take us into a life of fulfillment. It's going to take us into a place that is going to glorify him, that is going to build his kingdom. And it's going to make everything just come full circle because Jesus. And I really hope that encourages you, because I think a lot of times we can get stuck in those moments of suffering, or we can see somebody suffer and our hearts get so sad and we grieve for them. And grieving is perfectly normal. I don't want people to think that suffering and grieving are the same thing, because they're not. They're different. You need to grieve. You need to grieve through things, to work through things. And you also are called to suffer. And so we're going to suffer. But when you see somebody going through these awful trials, and when you're going through things, it's so quick to think, why, God, is this happening to me? Because I'm a good person. How, God, are you so loving if you're calling us to suffer, if you're making that person go through this trial? And you just need to remember, number one, because Jesus, because of his suffering and his death and the crucifixion, led to his resurrection. And then you need to think of, because it's going to lead to your life of fulfillment, a life that's just, to glorify God, to build his kingdom. I can't even find the words because I'm getting so excited. And I really hope that gives you some encouragement, because it is hard to get through the trials, but just think, I'm suffering because Jesus suffered, and I'm suffering because I'm going to look back and think, wow, thank you, God, for fulfilling my life, for your kingdom, your glory, your honor. Yes, Jesus. I'm going to leave you with a verse. That was a lot. I told you I got real excited about this day. 1 Peter 4, chapter 4, verse 19. It says, "So then, those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good." And I just love that. So, today, if you're in the amongst of trials and suffering, if you have others that you are walking beside that are in the amongst of trials and suffering, I just hope that you can pray with them, that they do not get discouraged, that they know that suffering is inevitable in this life, but that they are encouraged that it's going to lead to good. And share with them that verse I'm going to say one more time. It's 1 Peter 4:19. So then, those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. So go out there, continue to do good. I love you all. We'll see you next time. Bye.